Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your convening this hearing on this extraordinarily important topic. Thank you also to our witnesses, Mr. Fritz and Ambassador Barks-Ruggles. Appreciate the commitment you have to this region, to this people, to the interests of the United States of America, and your willingness to testify here today, and your ongoing work. I'm going to be very brief this morning. The United States of America believes that the people of Taiwan should be allowed to determine their own destiny. This is an inescapable aspect of having respect for the dignity of humankind. The Chinese Communist Party, on the other hand, believes that it should be free to usurp the will of the people of Taiwan. Taiwan is not some small outpost. It's comprised, as the chairman indicated, of almost 25 million people. It's one of the largest 20 global economies and leads the world in a number of cutting-edge technologies. It has its own government and its own military. But the Chinese Communist Party attempts to cut it off from global association and choke its economy, and it threatens invasion by military incursion and incendiary language. The question today is how America, a nation that believes in the dignity of humanity, can aid the millions of people of Taiwan to remain free to make their own decisions, to determine their own course, and to raise their children in the way of their own choosing. Quite simply, it's a matter of believing that the people of Taiwan should be free to make their own choice, or whether instead, whether the Communist Chinese Party should take that choice away from them and oppress them. So I look forward to our chance to hear from our witnesses and to be able to ask questions on these topics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it may well be confusing to our public generally, and perhaps to people on the Hill, to consider two things. One is the term that says that we believe in the one China policy, and then at the same time to say that we believe the people of Taiwan ought to be able to choose their own destiny. Can you describe what the one China policy means and how you square that with the principle that that the people of Taiwan should be able to choose their own course?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Romney. That's a great question, and certainly one that could use some further public elucidation. The one China policy refers to the fact that we have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. And of course, that has implications for who is seated in various international organizations. My colleague, Ambassador Ruggles, can speak to that. But under our One China policy, even though our relationship with Taiwan is now on an unofficial basis, we nonetheless have made clear in both public statements, private demarches, and otherwise, that we will continue to maintain and in fact even grow a very, very close relationship with Taiwan in the security, in the economic, in the cultural, and many other spheres. As you point out, Taiwan is a fellow democracy. It is important to peace and stability in the Western Pacific, and it is absolutely in the U.S. interest to make sure that the 24 million people of Taiwan are able to make choices about their own future, free from coercion from across the strait. And so we will continue to do everything we can to show that rock-solid American support for Taiwan's democracy and for its ability to choose its own future.
My perception of how we're doing really falls into sort of two buckets. One is associated with the people of Taiwan. My reading suggests that what the Communist Chinese Party has done in Hong Kong has solidified in the mind of the Taiwanese people that the idea of one country, two systems is not real. And the most recent actions, even today, where the Chinese Communist Party has raided a newspaper and incarcerated leaders of an independent newspaper in Hong Kong. This has got to underscore in the minds of the people of Taiwan that that China has a very different intent than allowing them to operate on their own if they were somehow combined with China. On the other hand, my perception is that the nations of the world, the geopolitical dynamics, have not been working in favor of a strong and free to make its own choice Taiwan. that instead the geopolitical dominoes have been falling in the other direction in terms of them being excluded from more and more international bodies, having recognition, being shut off by nations in the region. And I wonder why it is, if I'm correct, that China is, if you will, being more effective in closing off Taiwan from international support, why they're being successful at that, and why we're being unsuccessful at that, while they're winning and we're losing.
Thank you, Ranking Member Romney. We are of one mind on your observations regarding Hong Kong and how that applies to Taiwan. I obviously don't want to be in the position of speaking for folks on Taiwan, but clearly PRC promises of high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong and maintenance of Hong Kong's civil liberties have been completely and thoroughly discredited over the last year, particularly since the unilateral enactment of the national security law. So it is no surprise that that folks in Taiwan, who might at one point in the past have contemplated some consideration of a one country, two systems formula, would now find that to be an altogether unappetizing prospect. With regard to the geopolitical dynamics, certainly there are challenges. As you point out, the People's Republic of China is extremely aggressive in pushing to constrain Taiwan's political space. I would point, however, to successes we've had both on the multilateral front, and I'll let Ambassador Barks-Ruggles talk about that, but even bilaterally, the Biden-Harris administration has been quite successful in getting many of our closest friends and partners and allies to publicly declare their support for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and for Taiwan's democracy. The joint statement that resulted from the visit of the Japanese Prime Minister, the joint statement that resulted from the visit of the South Korean President, the G7 ministerial communique, the G7 summit communique, the U.S.-EU summit document, I can't remember if it was a communique or a joint statement. In all of these, we've seen unprecedented public statements in support of Taiwan and peace and stability across the strait. So again, Ranking Member Romney, I will not deny that the PRC is applying a lot of pressure on folks around the world to isolate Taiwan, but there are in fact some antibodies at work, and we're doing everything we can to strengthen those antibodies.
Thank you. There are many fronts on which we would like China to take a different course. This is obviously one of them, their ambition to dominate the people of Taiwan, but their treatment of the Uyghurs and minorities, religions, their predatory actions in the world economic marketplace. There's so many dimensions where we would like China to change course. But that raises the question about what we can do and what the administration's strategy is with regards to convincing the Chinese Communist Party to allow Taiwan to determine its own destiny and not to invade or dominate the people of Taiwan. And I'm not talking about military action. Clearly, there's a military component that figures very significantly into any effort to dissuade China from invasion or the like. But putting aside military deterrent, what things can we do that would have the potential of convincing China? Let's not focus on making Taiwan a vassal state. And we look back, we walked away from the TPP. Many people thought that the agreement that we might have in the region economically would be able to strengthen our hand relative to China and create a stronger neighborhood. The Quad obviously has potential with regards to that effort. But I'm interested in your view and the administration's view about what actions we can take. We oftentimes, when people do bad things, we place sanctions on them. The challenge with sanctions, of course, is that's what we do after they've done the bad thing. And we would like to prevent the bad thing from happening. What is our strategy with regards to convincing the Chinese not to play a heavy hand with regards to Taiwan?
Thank you, Ranking Member Romney. That's a fabulous question. First, we point out to our PRC counterparts often that few countries have benefited from peace and stability in that part of the world as much as the People's Republic of China has. Second, we make it clear that this is not just a bilateral concern. As I pointed out, we have been hard at work making sure that major partners of ours around the world are speaking up and demonstrating their support for Taiwan. And again, not necessarily in a military fashion, diplomatically, economically, parliamentary exchanges. There are a number of ways for that to be manifested. Third, we've also been very, very clear, as I mentioned earlier, with the PRC in terms of, I guess I would be best suited to just quote the Secretary Blinken. I mean, he said it would be a very serious mistake for anyone to resort to anything other than peaceful means to resolve cross-strait differences. And I am very confident that the PRC leaders in Beijing are crystal clear that if they were to decide to use some coercive manner to unify Taiwan, they would face grave consequences. And as you pointed out, Ranking Member Romney, those would not necessarily be confined to the military arena either. Reputational, economic, there'd be any number of areas in which I think they would have to think very, very long and hard about making a momentous choice like that.
I would just note my own personal view that the more specific we might be in advance with not only our own communications, but also with communications of our friends and allies around the world about the economic consequence of China using coercive means to impose its will on Taiwan would potentially be helpful in dissuading them from using such means. And that would be helpful for us to be extraordinarily explicit, and for our friends and allies around the world to combine and speak about this specifically so that China would have a good sense of what we're talking about. Because frankly, China and Russia, for that matter, have done a lot of bad things over the past couple of decades, and we've told them of the terrible consequences that would be rained upon them for the things they did, but somehow they're getting along just fine. And the consequence was not as great as they might have once feared. I think we need to be more specific as we deal with China and its potential aggressiveness with regards to Taiwan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions and comment. My understanding is that China has used its vaccines as a key part of diplomacy. At the same time, it is used this opportunity to suggest that America is not a very helpful ally of the people of Taiwan. Taiwan's ambassador indicated that she had actually received indication of texts coming from the Chinese Communist Party saying that Americans have so much vaccine that we're vaccinating our pets, and that we think more of our dogs than we think of the people of Taiwan. This kind of misinformation spreads throughout Taiwan, and therefore I want to underscore something that others have raised, which is the urgency of getting vaccinations, of getting vaccines to the people of Taiwan. There's a need for about 2 million vaccinations. We've agreed to 750,000. I would strongly encourage us to move as soon as we can to the higher number, and that we get these to the people of Taiwan as urgently as we possibly can. This is a nation obviously seeing a significant uptick in infections given the Delta variant, and it has humanitarian implications, but also strategic implications that are very important given the disinformation campaign that the Chinese are carrying out. Is what I'm saying consistent with your own understanding of what's happening with regards to Chinese misinformation, and is that happening on various fronts around the world?
Ranking Member Romney, you're absolutely right. I think Taiwan is probably receiving, the brunt of PRC disinformation. On the other hand, we've also seen Taiwan develop quite a bit of resilience to this sort of thing. They're getting very good at identifying and pushing back with media literacy, social media literacy programs, transparency, basically, and we have actually quite a lot to learn from them in terms of combating disinformation. And back to the Global Cooperation and Training Framework platform that Senator Coons mentioned, we have been able to use that platform to take some of Taiwan's expertise and share it with others around the world who are also subjected to PRC disinformation, but also disinformation from other bad actors, whether that be the Russians or others.
One more question, and that is, I would hate for us in our our concern about China's interference in the region with the people of Taiwan to do something or say something as a body or as individuals that would precipitate or give an excuse to China to take action they might not otherwise take. Do you have any warning or guidelines or suggestions to us? Because a number of us feel like, we might want to make it very clear that we stand with the free people of Taiwan, that we abhor what the Communist Chinese Party has communicated in its intent with regards to Taiwan. But are there boundaries we should not cross for fear of precipitating some type of coercive action?
That's a great question, Ranking Member Romney. Thank you for that. Of course, that is the entire premise of our One China policy, to make sure that we abide by our diplomatic ties with Beijing, while at the same time, under the within the parameters of our unofficial relationship with Taiwan, doing everything we can to support them. That includes stronger security cooperation, commercial ties across the board, vaccine donations, visits from VIPs, et cetera. But we also, as you point out, want to be very careful not to engage in any symbolic sorts of provocations that would do nothing other than merely raise the risk for Taiwan and perhaps precipitate the very thing that we are trying to avoid and deter, which is the PRC feeling compelled to take some sort of coercive action against the island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.